Hi, I'm Nick Maselli. At TD Bank, we believe all citizens need to be informed about the important financial issues that affect their daily lives. That's why we're proud to support programming produced by the CAUCUS Educational Corporation and their partners in public television.
This special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center. Funding has been provided by Virtua, NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, New Jersey Natural Gas, proud to support education in our communities, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, TD Bank, and by the New Jersey Education Association, working for great public schools for every child. Promotional support provided by the Star Ledger, powering NJ.com, and by the New Jersey Business and Industry Association and its monthly magazine, New Jersey Business.
This is One-on-One.
When you first heard that they were doing Charlie Rose and Gayle King, didn't you go, what?
People like laughing at others, so I don't mind if the other is me.
See, you go right into the character. That's what it is.
I'm bringing families together a half an hour each week. Man, I'm doing something special.
And so I do feel successful.
Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. Welcome to the WNET Tisch studio here in the heart of New York City at Lincoln Center. Let me introduce you to Mark Harris, who's the author of a fascinating book called Five Came Back, the story of Hollywood and the Second World War. Good to see you, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Looking at the cover of this book. Set this up for us. It's a story of, is it 5 directors?
It's 5 movie directors who were really the best that Hollywood had to offer. You know, Frank Capra, John Huston, John Ford, William Wyler, and George Stevens. These were the guys who were making the movies that everyone was seeing, were making the movies that were winning the Oscars every year. And after Pearl Harbor, they, along with 1/3 of Hollywood's adult male workforce, left to, in their case, accept officers' commissions and go become documentarians or propagandists or both for the war effort.
Were they largely propagandists?
Some of them were and some of them weren't. I mean, propaganda back then was a dirty word the same way it is now, except for the first months right after Pearl Harbor, when suddenly the idea of, you know, selling the war to soldiers, selling the war to Americans, some of whom had not been in favor of U.S. intervention, was a kind of universally acknowledged good and noble purpose. So Capra in particular was very much Frank Capra.
By the way, name the others.
John Huston, John Ford, George Stevens, and William Wyler were the others. Capra was kind of the hub. He was sent to Washington to oversee the entire filmmaking effort and many of the other directors. He'd won 3 Oscars for Best Director already, and he was put in charge of making a series of movies called Why We Fight, which were 7 one-hour movies that were intended to replace really boring lectures that young GIs were falling asleep during. Their purpose was to explain to the American fighting man, many of whom were just 18 or 19 years old, why they were fighting.
To sell the war.
Yep.
To sell recruitment.
To sell the war to them, yeah.
Were they working for the American military?
They were, the War Department was in charge of them. It was General George Marshall who pretty much had the idea when the war started that film could be an incredibly powerful means of communication.
But here's the interesting dilemma. And boy, talk about the impact of what, you know, we're talking about with the book in terms of how wars are fought today. Big influence, right?
Right.
But here's the thing. Many of the scenes in these films were reenacted.
Yeah.
They're reenactments. They weren't real footage. And so to what degree did these directors struggle with the fact that they weren't showing real war?
It was sort of a 3-way struggle in the hearts and souls of each of these directors. As directors, they wanted to make great movies. As Americans and patriots, they wanted to help the war effort in any way they could. And as men, they were interested in telling the truth. And there were times when making a great movie and telling the truth or showing the truth crashed into each other, and they faked footage. There was a famous documentary called Tunisian Victory, where the North African campaign was recreated in the Mojave Desert and Orlando, Florida. John Huston made what was widely considered one of the great battle films of all time, a film about the retaking of an Italian village called San Pietro. there was a very little tag at the end of the movie saying some of these scenes were recreated. The entire film was a recreation. Houston got to the town after the battle had already been fought and won. It was recreated, I should say, with the enthusiastic endorsement of Houston's higher-ups. These weren't directors who were acting in a renegade way against the wishes of the War Department. The Army was very much a participant in selling.
What are we looking at right there? What are we looking at?
That is a staged shot from San Pietro. That was shot on
Staged?
Yeah, it was shot on location in Italy, exactly where the battle had happened. So the rubble you're seeing in the background is actual bombing rubble, and the soldiers you're seeing are actual soldiers who John Huston was given as, if you will, extras or actors to replay this battle.
It's interesting. We are patriots. We're patriotic. And someone might argue, devil's advocate, what's the difference? What's the difference? I mean, we're Americans. We want to support our American military. So they fudged some scenes. Those scenes didn't really happen that way. The American military were really in control of what these directors were doing. What's the big deal? You say?
It's a complicated thing because Huston, for instance, didn't fake the footage because the real footage didn't look good enough. He faked the footage because the real footage didn't exist, and he wanted American movie-going audiences to see what war looked like, to see what battle looked like. So he recreated this battle based on what he had seen of shooting and combat, and he did it in this way that we now associate with realism, but which he, in part, invented. For instance, the camera shakes when a bomb goes off. People hadn't done that before, but Huston realized that made it look real.
But here's the thing, fast forward, I told you that years later, I actually did my academic research, doctoral research on the Gulf War, early 1990s, looking at CNN and ABC, the smart bombs, right?
Right.
The military, together with those two networks, I argued, without getting into a whole big thing, that they choreographed, in many ways, the war coverage. Because the military gave those two networks the footage. That's all they had.
Right.
How much different is that than what you're talking about?
I mean, they're both pretty terrible, you know, and the truth of it is that these guys, the directors themselves, knew it. George Stevens was really ashamed of and embarrassed by his participation in a reenactment, and he resolved never to do it again and ended up shooting some of the truest and most accurate and least doctored footage of the war. Huston never admitted that San Pietro was all restaged.
Never admitted.
Clearly, it weighed on his conscience.
But here's the thing. All the networks, by the way, did. It wasn't just those two networks. All the networks used what the military gave them. Do you think that what you're talking about in this book and what I was just referring to has dramatically shaped the way Americans expect to see war? Because we see it as a movie, and as opposed to if we were to see more realistic images of war, that we just couldn't handle it?
Well, when you go back to the Second World War, you're talking about a time when media was really limited. If you were an American civilian and you wanted to take in the war, radio and print and movies were your only options. And if you wanted to see the war, that lets out radio and print. You had to go to a movie theater and watch a newsreel or a documentary. And World War II was the first war you could see, even if what you saw was, you know, really, really limited and often censored. I mean, there was footage of D-Day, 10 days after D-Day in American movie theaters, but it wasn't nearly the kind of brutal or graphic footage that we now know, really represented D-Day. Same thing with the first footage of the camps. So World War II did plant the seeds in the American public for the idea that war should be something that you can be shown. Battles should be something that you can see. And of course, with the explosion of television and 24-hour news and an infinite number of options for taking in information, the demand for getting to see it all has only, increased exponentially.
It's an important book about an incredibly important topic. And the topic is not just war, but our view of war and the connection between Hollywood and war and back and forth. The author is Mark Harris. The book is Five Came Back, the story of Hollywood and the Second World War. I want to thank you for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
At Lincoln Center. Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this.
If you would like more information on this program, or if you'd like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Visit us online at oneonone.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD, and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Louis Armstrong.
70 years old, and here I am at the Waldorf Astoria. How'd I get so lucky? I got stories on top of stories. I used to work for Al Capone. He walked right up to me and he said, "Boy, you playing in New York tomorrow night, you hear?" The son of a bitch pull out this big revolver. And I say, maybe I do open in New York.
He's not listening, but we are. John Douglas Thompson plays Satchmo at the Waldorf, at the West Side Theater upstairs at 407 West 43rd Street. How you doing? Why weren't you listening to that?
Well, you know, I don't want to ruin my suspension of disbelief.
Okay.
I'm not Armstrong, I'm not Glazer, so if I see that sort of stuff, it kind of gets in my head. Then I say, that's what I look like? That's what I'm doing? And then it kind of messes me up.
So non-artists look at artists and say, oh, how do they do it?
Really?
So here we go. So this is a story about Louis Armstrong.
Yes.
And his manager, Joe Glazer.
Yes.
They had a fascinating relationship. You were just telling me before we got on the air. They met in
the 30s, or I think early 30s, and remained together, manager and client, until Glazer passed away in 1969.
Right.
And then Armstrong obviously passed away in 1971. But what's unique about their relationship is Armstrong had Glazer handle everything. Glazer even picked the musicians for the people that were going to be in the band and handled all the administrative stuff.
all the business.
Everything. So Armstrong could just show up and play. That's what he wanted to do.
Is it relevant? And by the way, you play both parts in this play. For 90 minutes, you play all three parts. And the three parts are Glazer, are Louis Armstrong, and Miles Davis,
yes.
which I'm fascinated. You'll tell us Miles Davis piece in a second.
Yeah.
The fact that Glazer is white, relevant to the story?
Oh, yeah, very relevant to the story. Terry Teachout, who wrote the play, really wanted to have the actor playing Armstrong cross the color barrier. And Glazer, obviously being a white person, and he was Jewish, and Terry wanted me to cross that barrier and go back and forth between Armstrong and Glazer. But it is really interesting in the racial dynamics of what was going on with music and commerce at that time, and what a jazz musician needed to have in order to be successful. And he needed that kind of a partnership. And Glazer was associated with the mob and Al Capone and that sort of stuff. And back in Chicago, if you were a jazz musician and you wanted to make it, you really needed to have some sort of an alignment with these mobsters in these clubs in order to play.
Yeah, people think like, oh, wow, you were connected to the mob in Chicago or New York, and you're thinking, that wasn't all that shocking. That was more common than people think.
That was, I would think, certainly in the time in the 30s when Armstrong was coming up in Chicago, because he got there in like 1922. From there on into the 40s and maybe even to the 50s, mobs really controlled a lot of the South Side and the jazz clubs where the musicians needed to play, to be heard, to build an audience, to build some sort of a following.
But Miles Davis, who is this amazing amazing musician, whose public persona, brand, whatever, reputation is so much different from Louis Armstrong.
Yeah.
How does he fit into this?
Well, we wanted to have, it's very interesting, we didn't have Miles Davis in the play originally. He was kind of a character that was written in when we first started doing it up in the Berkshires. And we really wanted a detractor against Armstrong, a strong antagonist in the story. And Armstrong and Glazer, Armstrong and Davis are very different individuals. Davis was kind of a middle class, grew up at a different time. Very aggressive, very pro-civil rights, very civil rights activist, and in his music and in his persona. And Armstrong, from Davis's perspective, wasn't that. Davis
was he not quote unquote black enough?
Right. Yeah, and I think with Armstrong, he came up in the vaudeville. He came out of a whole different era. It was a different generation.
Was he referred to as an Uncle Tom?
Yeah. Certainly,
which is the worst thing that could possibly be said.
Well,
there are lots of terrible
to someone
things
of his
that could be said.
stature and a black musician, yeah, to have that be a big part of his branding for people to think of him in that way. But I also think it was a misguided understanding about Armstrong. Particularly, people didn't really understand he came up in the whole vaudeville circuit. and what musicians had to do in order to get along and stay alive for that purpose. And also what Armstrong did do with the civil rights movement. He did many things that were kind of under the radar that people didn't know about, that the play illuminates and helps people understand.
Can we take a look at the second clip?
You can take a look at this.
You're not going to look at it? You're really not? All right, well, we're going to do it. You mind?
Okay. Yeah, please do it.
This is Joe Glazer. This is Louis Armstrong's manager. You play this role as well, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you pull that off. Let's look at the clip.
We got to get him a white manager or he ain't going nowhere, no how. I sit him down and I say, look, Louis, you want to work for me, here's the deal. Stop blowing your brains out every night playing all them goddamn high C's. Ain't no money in it. Told me where to play, told me who to play with. There's nothing I wouldn't do for Louis, not a goddamn thing, understand? I'm Louis and Louis's me. Best friend I ever had.
Wow.
Did it convince you? Did you believe it?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And the Miles Davis persona.
What did that? Well, there's a lot of Miles on YouTube.
Right.
You know, there's a
Was that
really
with his
famous.
back, is that with his back to the audience? I'm
And
sorry.
his finger up? No,
That's right.
No, but there's a 60 Minutes interview,
Yeah.
which is really, you know, the piece that you want to see. And I was able to
Is that
study
with Mike Wallace?
I think it, not Mike, yeah, I think it is with Mike Wallace.
Is it Mike
I was
Wallace
gonna
or
say
check
it
that
was-
or Ed Bradley?
Yeah, it's either
Ed
one of the two,
Bradley. Okay,
one
go
of the
ahead.
two. But anyways, you can kind of see Miles, and you can kind of get his vibe. And I'm a big Miles Davis fan. I got all of his music, so I kind of knew about him. I knew more about him than Armstrong when I went into this project. So I was able to just look at the YouTube stuff and kind of get a good studying of him and get his voice, which is very much like a raspy whisper.
I asked you before we got in here where you grew up and how you got here. Tell folks.
How I got to be an actor, or how I got to be this?
Give us the route you took.
The route that I took, I was born in Bath, England. I left when I was like 2.5 years old, moved from Bath to Montreal, Canada. Lived there till I was about 10 and a half, 11, then from Montreal, Canada to Rochester, New York. And then from Rochester
Yeah, well, the love of acting
to
comes
Brooklyn.
The love of acting comes in when? Where?
I was actually in New Haven, Connecticut. I was going to go on a date. I had asked this young woman to go on a date with me. To my surprise, she stood me up. I got to the theater, and went to see the play by myself. And it was an August Wilson play called Joe Turner's Come and Gone. And I saw the play, and immediately at that moment, fell in love with acting and knew that that's what I wanted to do.
How old were you?
I was about 26, 27.
That's when it happened?
Yeah, I've been acting since I was 29.
Wow. Yeah. Of all the times I've asked that question, it's the latest that anyone said that it hit them.
That they got into acting, really?
Yeah. So it wasn't like when I was a kid, I knew.
Right,
the last
right.
person sat there said I was 5.
That they knew they wanted to be an actor when they were 5. No, I mean, for me, I thought of acting as kind of a hobby, if anything. You know, I'd seen maybe one play prior to seeing the August Wilson show. And what was great about seeing that play was there were all these African Americans on stage telling a story that related to me.
Right.
And so that made me really interested in the process and what acting was all about. Now, I didn't go into acting right away. It took me about 6.5, 7 years to get to that point. But I knew that the seeds were planted from watching that performance.
John Douglas Thompson is in Satchmo at the Waldorf at the West Side Theater upstairs at 407 West 43rd Street. I want to thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Got it.
Thanks.
Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this.
If you would like more information on this program, or if you'd like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Visit us online at oneonone.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD, and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
Director Jack Cummings III and actress Barbara Andres are all together in I Remember Mama, produced by Transport Group, being performed at the Gym at Judson at 243 Thompson Street down in the Village. Set this up for us. I Remember Mama is all about?
Mama and her family.
Okay, so hold on. This is my notes say it's between 1910 and 1920. It's a time period.
Actually, yes.
And there are 10 dining room tables, right?
Oh, you're giving it away. Yes.
Oh, no, I shouldn't say that? Okay.
No, you can. Of course you can. But this is a different approach to a very beautiful play. It's not being done in the same kind of traditional scene after scene after scene. And it's really Jack's vision. Jack is I've worked with him luckily enough. This is our 4th show together. And it's a unique presentation. And we do have 10 dining room tables, which of course is the center of home, as we all know.
But 10 very extraordinary actresses.
Indeed.
And are you Mama?
I am Mama.
You're Mama. And set this up for us. Who's Mama and why she's... What am I doing with my hands? Like all of a sudden,
Mama.
who's Mama? And why she's so important?
Well, the play, it's about a daughter.
Her name is
Katrin.
Katrin, that's what I thought.
The parents, Mama and Papa, are Norwegian immigrants, and their children were born here. And so the story revolves around the daughter's discovery and remembering who her mother was. And by doing that, she becomes a writer when she realizes that instead of writing epic adventure type stories, I really should be writing about my family. And in particular, the person I remember the most is my mother. So we'll write about her. And that's how this character becomes a very famous writer by the end of the play.
What moved you about this? What moves you right now just hearing about it?
Well, it's a story that everyone can connect with in the world, and that's what we do in theater, is we try to touch an individual and an audience at one given time. And we've all had a mother. Some of us have been lucky in that we've experienced that relationship for a longer period. But what is really most moving about it is it's a slice, if that's a good word, probably not, but it's a picture of everyday living that we don't necessarily see enough of in the theater, because it does ignite memories of our own as an audience. And these are very good, simple people. They're not perfect. It's not a perfect family. There is no such thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask where that is. Right?
Yeah, and the fact is that, Mama, from my point of view, I'm Mama, and she has troubles, she has problems, she has loves, she has a rich and complicated life, even though their life, being Norwegian, immigrants, is reasonably simple compared to today's living. But we're kind of in limbo in time space, in that we're not doing it in period costumes.
You're not?
No, we are not.
So the fact that it's 1910 to 1920 does not change how you are dressed?
Exactly. The point is that it's a universal truth of living with your siblings, your sisters. I have 4 sisters in the play,
And you all get along so well.
Well, no.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
Of course
What
not.
family would that be?
Exactly. Well, that's the point. And it's an exciting piece because it's beautifully written. And an actor always likes to get their teeth into some good scripts. And this is a beautiful script. Plus, we have, which is the most unique element, thanks to his vision, the idea that he could bring 10 elderly women, really veteran, very, very experienced women.
Right here?
There they are. Together for sharing their body of wisdom and work and life experience. This has never happened before that I know of.
What's it like directing these 10 extraordinarily talented women?
Well, you're very humbled, and you feel often that you don't know anything because you're looking at 10 people whose collective experience is hundreds of years in the theater, and I don't have that. And so they know so much, and I hope to know as much as they do, or half of what they know someday. But I have to kind of struggle with putting that admiration and humility aside, because they need me, and they need.
Indeed.
And so it's, but they're all roughly my mother's age. And so it's like directing 10 of your mothers all at the same time. And the director role, by nature, can become, or is, aspects of it is a parent role, and that you are in charge of guiding them, protecting them, getting the best out of them. And it's challenging in every possible way, but it's thrilling.
With these 10 very talented women, with the story you're describing, and by the way, let me plug it again, if you don't mind.
Please.
It is at the Gym at Judson, 243 Thompson Street. It is called I Remember Mama. People should go see it. But let me just ask you this. Egos matter?
Oh, of course.
I'm not talking about in real life. I'm
No,
not talking about in the play. I'm talking about among the women.
Yes.
Yes.
That was my, of course. Yes, of course. I mean, we are 10
leading
talented ladies.
Yeah. 10 leading ladies
Yes.
get together and?
And it's complicated and beautiful. It really is, because there is respect. The bottom line is this. There's a lot of respect in the room. There has to be. And so when the ego goes a little, you go, oh my God, isn't she terrific? Isn't
You do,
she
you
terrific?
step back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Simultaneously aggravated with each other and fiercely protective of each other.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
like a family.
Well, it is.
That's like
already.
a family.
It really
Yeah.
is, and that would be the best that we could possibly ever offer in our production.
And
is
time
our
I've left.
family.
I often ask this, but I'm curious. Would you want people to walk away with? Is it just what they walk away with, their own?
Oh, absolutely. An individual has to take their own perspective and experience, and ideally, if there's 100 people in the house, and I don't know that we seat more than that, but each individual should have their own evening, their own connective to the text, because that's what you're after. It's not a group process. It's to touch the human soul somewhere in that house individually. And I think it happens. It happens all the time.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's that like? A couple seconds left.
It's quite a mind-blowing experience to see these 10 women, the average age is 75, all together en masse. That's what is really unique. Normally you're seeing them in relationship to younger people or men. This is just them in one concentrated group, and that is what's really, I think, kind of going to thrill people.
And in actuality, which we haven't mentioned,
Couple seconds.
we are playing all the roles.
Yes, men, women.
25 roles, 10 women.
That's
Yeah.
right. Young
listen.
kids, our uncles, everything.
We all need to remember Mama, whether she's here or not. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One on One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the CAUCUS Educational Corporation, celebrating 25 years of broadcast excellence in partnership with St. Joseph's Healthcare System. This special edition of One on One with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center. Funding has been provided by Virtua, NJIT, New Jersey Natural Gas, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, TD Bank, and by the New Jersey Education Association. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.
Some things were never meant to be cut. That's why when you have knee replacement at Virtua, we don't cut the quadriceps tendon. Because when it comes to getting you past chronic knee pain and on with your life, it's what we don't cut that counts. Visit GotMyLifeBack.org today.